Chapter 13. Her last 2 days. Windows in red and blue flew towards her. They got bigger and clearer as they came close to the surface of the computer screen and then passed away. She had stopped changing Arabic into English, stopped typing, and the words had flickered and disappeared into the blackness from where the flying windows now came. From infinity, specks at first and then vibrant checks and greens. She thought the day after tomorrow I shall inshallah be on the train, coach D, seat number 16F, and by this time in the afternoon the train would have long left Scotland. She was alone in the room because Diane had gone to her weekly research methods class. It was as if her presence had kept Summer working and now she could not concentrate. She stood up and walked around. The room was small, just enough space for the two desks, two swivel chairs, Diane's guardian on the floor. She looked out of the window at the parked cars, 3 students crossing the road, a dark, freezing sky. In a few days, on another continent, sunshine all the time. Tomorrow's goodbye weighed on her, so that now, as she sat down again at the desk, she considered ways of avoiding it, bypassing the awkward words, the little silences in between. In the past, when she had imagined leaving the city, she had seen herself easily slipping away, casually, with nothing left behind. Now everything was murky, and at times she almost forgot why she was leaving. Then she would remember Amir and feel guilty that she rarely thought of him, never dreamt of him. She was far from what her aunt had wanted her to be. The child was not the focus of her life, not the center where once his father had been. She had no premonition about the knock on the door, but she saw the sadness that came in with him, as if it were smoke, as if it had colors of ivory and mauve, faintly corrosive. Ray sat on Diane's chair. He said, "I'm going away tomorrow." And she became confused because she was the one who was going away. Her bags were packed, her tickets crisp and new, and she became confused because this was term time and he had classes running, Farid visiting for a few weeks. "Do you remember I spoke to you about my uncle in Sterling?" She nodded. She remembered him in the nursing home, the elder brother of David, who had gone to Egypt and never came back. "He passed away." "Oh, I'm sorry." Ray looked at the ghostly windows that blew on the computer screen. There was no tragedy in his death, but still the force of death was with them in the room, clean, irreversible. The enemy of continuity had sliced their lives today, but in this defeat there was something comforting, something soft. He sat with his elbows on his knees and talked about how he had found out the details of his uncle's last hours, the funeral ahead, and because endings inspire a looking back, a summary, she listened to the outline of a completed life, a career, memories from a summer holiday. He said, "I wanted to be with you tomorrow before you left." "It doesn't matter now." The smoke in the room stung her eyes. This was the goodbye then. This was the goodbye she had thought she could avoid. It had come a day early. "It matters very much to me. I'm so sorry." "Are you going to drive?" A voice with tears was not attractive. She should not talk in such an ugly voice. "Yes, I'll drive." "Are you well enough to drive?" "I'll be all right. I promise. I would hate myself if I didn't go." More than anything else in the world, now she wanted to go with him to Sterling. It took her by surprise how irrational and childish she could be, how she could want something that wasn't feasible, wasn't right at all. But she could not push the want away. More than anything else, she wanted now to leave the university, the prison of its familiar buildings, its familiar routine. She wanted to leave Aberdeen, get away from where she had been ill and sleepy for so long. They would drive south towards a city she had never been to before. They would stop on the way for petrol, and from the shop he would get her mineral water and sweets. When she spoke, her voice was falsely light, wanting him to know that she was aware it could not happen, that it was frivolous, to be dismissed by common sense, dispersed with humor. I wish I could come with you. I wish you could too. It would make all the difference. Because he was not humoring her, because he was not surprised, she had no resistance. The sudden darkness when she covered her face with her hands, his voice and feeling his arms around her, this was what she had feared all along, that everything under the surface would converge and break. It was closer than she had imagined, prickly and sudden, noisy sobbing, messy because of her runny nose. He said he loved her. He said things that made her cry more, not less. She told him that and lifted her head from his shoulder, breathed. He said sorry and held her hands, said she had beautiful hands. His hands were too warm, a little clammy, unnaturally warm, as if he was not well, as if he was ill. She had not known that he was like that. She had not known this about him, and now she felt sorry for him, closer to him. It was a closeness that soothed her, made her stop crying. She looked down at their fingers entwined, the difference between them and how smooth and cool her skin was. The footsteps came like a dream. She heard them first and moved away from him, pushed her chair back. She saw the room change, shift into what it had been before, harsh neon light, paper-filled, bathed in the low hum of the computer. Diane's familiar voice as she pushed open the door. Got some chewies. Then she stopped at the unprecedented sight of her supervisor in her room, sitting on her chair. The surprise took away her usual confidence, and standing before them holding her folders and books, she looked young and untidy, her cheeks red from walking in the cold. Hello, said Summer, trying to smooth out the guilt from her voice. She searched Diane's face for signs, afraid she would find suspicion. Ray was frowning, his eyes saying, "What are you doing here?" He had forgotten that Diane too belonged to this room. Is it very cold outside? Summer asked, anything to say. Diane mumbled something about snow. The absence of a third chair meant that she stood near the door, hovering, not knowing what to do. By that time, Ray's frown had changed to understanding. He had, for Diane, a calm greeting, a question. How are you getting on with the literature review? I haven't seen anything from you lately. Diane mumbled that it was coming along. She was behind in her thesis and had been since the beginning of the term, avoiding him. For her sake, and so that the awkwardness in the room would end, Summer wished that he would go away. He did leave, without having explained his presence, and she had to face Diane's annoyed, "What was he doing here?" While Summer put together a reply about urgent work he needed her to do before going away, Diane dumped her books on the desk and started to empty her pockets. She reclaimed her chair, was herself again, mimicking Ray's voice. I haven't seen anything from you lately. The information that he was going to Sterling caught her interest. That's the second time this term he gets someone to take over his classes, she said, and handed Summer a piece of chewing gum. It was cold when Summer went home, a cold that had a smell, bruised her nose, stunned her mind a little. There were lights in her head. They made everything cutting, too clear for her eyes. The sight of her suitcases. They stood in the corner of the room, neat and compact. She was going away. She was already not of this room, where only a few of her things remained in their place, and she was someone else because of what he said to her today. From early on, it was the way he spoke to her, to the inside of her, not around her, over her head, around her shoulders. That was how others spoke to her, their words bouncing against her skin and ears, cascading, and she perfectly still, untouched, always alone. If he would speak to her all the time, every day, if all of life could be like that. The light in her head was too bright to see what was in the room. She couldn't see the suitcases anymore, the bed she leant against as she sat on the floor, the bottle of perfume he had given her. She couldn't see. She would not have minded the blindness if it was not for the pain. It came from the light. It made her eyes sore, even her stomach tight. If she could forget the pain, she would be calm and she would sink into the blindness with pleasing thoughts, dreaming with the temperature falling outside. It was because Diane had come into the room. That was when the pain began. The sudden change, having to abruptly move away from him. If Diane had seen him holding her hand, if she had heard, it would be better not to think of that. Better not to think of how, after the initial surprise, it would have looked so silly to Diane, amusing to repeat, a good piece of department gossip. If she could stop thinking of that. Gossip, tastier than average, because they were an unlikely couple, because of who she was, how she dressed. Better not to think. They had been lucky, they were safe, but still the light in her head, the ifs like snakes coiling, never still. Nothing that Allah forbids His servants is good. It will only diminish them, ultimately or soon in this life or the next. Today she had failed herself, and the esteem with which he was held by others could have been threatened. The saying went, only the able, clever one falls. She had been careful all along, on her guard, and yet today had come, smooth and inevitable, as if it had been waiting for her all the time, close, not far, close as a smile. Seeking forgiveness from Allah, wanting to make things right as they should be. Only one thing can make things right, washed, clear-cut. Months ago, Yasmin had asked, are you hoping he would become a Muslim so you could get married? Many times Yasmin had asked, are you sure he's going to become a Muslim? And Summer had shrugged away her friend's concern, drifted along too much in awe of what was between them to ask any questions. But now she could not go on like that. She must know, find out. She didn't even know how attached he was to his beliefs. So many things she could have asked him about and she hadn't. And now she was leaving with the future between them fluid, unsettled, her conscience troubled. The light in her head, blurred soapy vision, a migraine like the one she had when she and Yasmin had visited him at home. It seemed a long time ago, yet it was only 4 months. Autumn then, and she had washed the mugs in the kitchen sink and looked out of the window at the lights in the other buildings, the garden at the back. She had felt unwelcome that day. She had felt at home, and that was too much for her then. She was not strong enough, and that was why the pain came. The first part of the night passed, a bit of sleep, dreamless, light as acid. When she could see again, she saw from the window snow. Snow filled the sky and poured down like it would never stop. It covered the street below, the empty parked cars, the roofs of the buildings all around. When she was young in Khartoum and when it rained at night, thunder and lightning would wake her up, so dramatic that she used to think Judgment Day had arrived. Lightning cracking the sky like eggshell and everything covered by darkness opening out in the light. Rain had meant an altered day, no school, flooded streets, everything in the shade. If the snow kept falling thickly, if it did not stop until morning, then the roads would be blocked. It had happened in past winters. It could happen again. Ray would not be able to go to Sterling, and she could see him again, ask him, and be reassured. Maybe the roads would be blocked for days, The trains wouldn't run, and even she, the day after, would not be able to leave. So much elation with this idea and the falling snow. That was what she really wanted. She did not want to go to Egypt interpreting interviews for the anti terrorist program. She did not want to go to Khartoum and bring Amir. Not yet, not now. How can Amir come when she was so unsettled? If the snow would keep falling, if the roads would be blocked, she knew what she was going to do. She had the courage. Everything would be made right and simple. Already she did not belong to this room. She had finished serving time in this room. Illness, convalescence, recovery. Now the room was bare and dry, lit up by the falling snow. Drawn, and she began to put away the few of her belongings that were still not packed. Her prayer mat, a few things that were drying on the radiator, some of her folders and papers from work. The blanket, the curtains, and the kitchen things went into a box that would go into storage. The bottle of perfume he had given her. She opened it, and the scent was heavy enough to rise in the room, soften the edge of the cold. She thought of what she would tell him, all the things she would translate for him. He knew a lot, like others here. This world held his attention and the scope of his mind, but he did not know about the stream of Kothar, the day of promises, or what stops her heart from resting. And the balance he admired. He would not understand it until he lived it. Once there was a time when she could do nothing, when she was held down by something heavy, clogged up, dragging herself to pray, even her faith sluggish. Yet Allah had rewarded her even for these imperfect prayers. She had been protected from all the extremes, pills, breakdowns, attempts at suicide. A barrier was put between her and the things like that, the balance that Ray admired. For this admiration, she would gather her courage and talk to him. She would make him happy. She could do so much for him. She wanted to cook for him different things and then stand in the kitchen and think, I should change my clothes, wash for her hair and clothes would be smelling of food. Fari could come and live with them. She would not need to go to boarding school anymore, and he would like that, seeing his daughter every day, not having to drive to Edinburgh. And Fari would like Amir. Girls her age liked younger children. She would be kind to Fari. She would do everything for her, clean her room, sort her school clothes. She would treat her like a princess. When they went out shopping together, she would buy her pretty things, soap that smelt of raspberries and ribbons of different widths for her hair.